To begin, we do the tennis ball shoulder massage, which works the upper back muscles and the shoulder blade muscles or the scapular muscles. You can use whatever device or ball that you feel most comfortable to help massage that area. I like the tennis ball because it gives a little bit, but it also has some firmness. You can place the ball just in the middle of your back between your shoulder blade and your spine, or you can place the ball on a particular tender point to try to rub that area out. With the tennis ball in your upper back, you now can move your shoulder back and forth. You can hold your arm externally rotated as shown here, or you can put it to your side, allowing the tennis ball to massage the muscles. I recommend at least 2 minutes of using the tennis ball before moving on. Next, we work on the posterior chain muscles as part of the thoracic mobility and lumbar flattening video. So here's an abbreviation of that. Once we've done the localized massage using the tennis ball, we now can do a generalized mobility of the upper thoracic region. This recognizes the critical role that the thoracic spine plays in shoulder function. I use different tools, and I also move my spine as well as rest on these devices. And so you need to figure out what is best for you, what is most comfortable, so that you can maximize thoracic mobility. Like the tennis ball massage, I recommend at least 2 minutes of thoracic mobility before moving on. When doing these exercises, if it's too uncomfortable for you to raise your arms over your head, then slowly go as far as you can into your zone of discomfort, hold it there for a little bit, then pull back. Through daily exercise, you can shrink the zone of discomfort of your shoulder and increase the zone of comfort. Next, we move to thoracic mobility with a focus on the latissimus dorsi muscle, which is a very important muscle that attaches to your upper arm and goes all the way down to your hips. The insert shows how to do this same exercise while standing. Because the latissimus dorsi muscle is both a low back hip muscle and a shoulder muscle, that's one of the reasons why the hip and the shoulder are interconnected. Here I'm showing a variety of ways of stretching the latissimus dorsi, both 2 different ways with using a physio ball as well as now using a foam roller. With shoulder pain, this exercise can actually be uncomfortable, so work your way up to see if you can get to the point of being able to do this for 2 minutes. Now we transition from upper back and scapular mobility to scapular strengthening. While laying on the floor or on your bed, keep your shoulder blades as close to the floor as possible. Then slowly raise your arms to your side to try to get them overhead, as shown in the video. If your hands raise off the floor before they get to the very top, then slow down and try to bounce back and forth to try to get a little bit more flexibility in your upper body, in your upper back. The purpose of this exercise is to strengthen the scapular muscles while keeping good posture, which means we're keeping our shoulder blades on the ground as well as our arms on the ground. For many, don't be surprised if your hands begin to rise off the floor as shown in this picture here. If that's the case, you can do some gentle bouncing back and forth as shown here until your hands can reach overhead. This might take several days or weeks of doing this exercise, and I recommend doing this for about 2 minutes each time. The next step is to raise your shoulders off the floor, almost like a reverse push-up, as shown here. Imagine your shoulder blades are trying to kiss each other. Work your way up so that you can hold your chest in the air for 5 seconds and repeat that 10 times. Next, we work on scapular strengthening prone or facing down. First thing we do is try to kiss our shoulder blades together. Try to bring our elbows to our rear pockets. Do this 10 times. Next, we raise our elbows to our side as shown, still bringing our shoulder blades towards each other as if they're kissing. Again, do this 10 times. Next, we move into the Ys, where we raise our arms overhead as much as pain and discomfort allows us, always bringing our shoulder blades to each other. To begin this sequence, I like to stretch out the upper back as well as the shoulders in the child's pose position. You can hold this position for 15 to 30 seconds as well as add a little bounce so you can have a dynamic stretch of the upper back and the shoulders. Next, I like to stretch out my lower back by curving my spine, arching my spine, curving and arching, and doing this 5 to 10 times. This is also a core exercise, so it provides mobility and stability of the low back muscles. Adding core strength to shoulder exercises increases shoulder stability. After 5 to 10 repetitions, try to hold your spine somewhere in the neutral middle. This will challenge your core as you proceed to the next step. Now proceed to drop your upper back towards the floor, trying to bring your shoulder blades toward your spine. You can also imagine trying to have your shoulder blades kiss each other. Consider this as the first step towards doing a push-up. Start with trying to do at least 5 of these. Next, we work on the lower scapular muscles by drawing our elbows towards our back pocket. With each pullback, try to keep your hips stable as well as your opposite shoulder stable. Start off with 5 on each shoulder. Now we work on dynamic stability of the shoulders by moving back and forth, sideways, forwards and backwards, and even circular. Try to do this for at least 10 seconds and try to work your way up to doing it for a whole minute. This is a great way to improve strength, endurance, and balance of your shoulder complex. Next, we proceed to more challenging scapular kissing exercise and dynamic stability exercise by moving the knees further away from the hips. Trying to keep the hips neutral and bring our shoulder blades back towards the spine, trying to get the shoulder blades to kiss, and then proceeding to doing dynamic movements of sideways, forwards, and backwards. The third challenge is lifting the knees off the floor. So now it's just your hands and your toes, and you're holding a plank while keeping your hips stable. This is the first step towards a push-up. But we're holding this as a plank, but we're not just holding it steady. We're moving our shoulders back and forth, forwards and backwards, to increase the dynamic strength, endurance, and balance of the shoulder complex, as well as the overall upper body. The ultimate goal is to be able to hold this position for at least 1 minute. Now we use some tools for mobility strengthening sequence. Here, simply crossing your arms to stretch out both shoulders. You start off this way. This helps stretch out the upper back as well as the rotator cuff muscles. Now we progress to using a towel. I get a nice long towel. The hand towel could be too short. Maybe you use a small bath towel. One of the amazing things about the shoulder complex is that it can move in many directions at the same time. You can raise it over your head and externally rotate your shoulder at the same time, or you can reach behind you and internally rotate your shoulder at the same time. This is a multi-directional stretch. Work on holding the stretch for up to 2 minutes on both sides. This can be both a dynamic stretch as well as a static stretch. The goal would be to do both types of stretches for 2 minutes on both sides. Now this can take you several weeks to get to this point, so be patient. You can also adjust this exercise as shown. Instead of pulling it over your head, use your shoulder if it's putting it over your head is too uncomfortable. Now we get into using resistance bands to strengthen up the shoulder. TheraBands is a resistance band that is used commonly in the physical therapy clinics. And the ticker demonstrates how the color is associated with resistance. You can experiment with which resistance to start with, or you can ask a physical therapist or a fitness trainer. Now there are other brands of resistance bands and resistance tubes out there that you can purchase as well, and they too will have some form of color scheme. So I'm just giving you an example that there are color schemes with these resistance bands. Usually these TheraBands are wrapped around a door handle, but because my filming studio does not have a door, I've improvised here. So once you get the band secured, you then step far enough away that there's some resistance on the band initially, and now you start doing movement exercises. Here I'm strengthening up the internal rotators, which is called the Subscapularis. I consider this the core muscle of the shoulder because not only is it a shoulder blade or a scapularis stabilizer, it also is considered a rotator cuff muscle. It's important for you to keep your elbow and forearm at 90 degrees and the elbow next to your body for maximal benefit. Now we transition into a shoulder complex exercise. This doesn't exercise a singular muscle, but it works the shoulder complex as a whole. This is also a kinetic chain core exercise, so therefore I put my opposite foot forward and I want to stabilize my entire body as I do this exercise. I don't want to have a resistance band that's so heavy that I have to hike my shoulder up in order to do this exercise. Now we transition to the third shoulder exercise where we turn and face the resistance band, and now we pull backwards. This also is a shoulder complex exercise, but in the opposite direction. We now rotate our body 90 degrees, and we now focus on rotator cuff strengthening. As with all these exercises, the elbow needs to be held close to the side in order to maximize the focus on the shoulder muscles. When we're done here, we can then switch hands in a TheraBand and start all over again. Here is a subscapularis muscle. Next is the shoulder complex strengthening exercise, phase 1. Remember, you want to put the opposite foot forward to increase the challenge of your core strengthening and your kinetic chain stabilization. Next, we move to shoulder complex core strengthening, phase 2. Remember, put the opposite foot forward in order to also challenge your kinetic chain. Notice how I keep my elbow close to my side, and that's important in all these exercises, that the elbow stays close to your side. And now we transition to rotator cuff strengthening. In particular, these are strengthening the infraspinatus and the teres minor muscle. We'll get to the supraspinatus, which is another rotator cuff muscle, in just a moment. Now we're going to show you how to use the resistance bands without needing a door frame. You actually can just use your foot. This is a cross-body exercise, so this is going to be focusing on the supraspinatus muscle of the rotator cuff, but it's also a core stability exercise as well. Now I have you switch sides, and you'll do the opposite shoulder in order to improve also the rotator cuff strengthening and core stability. Now we're going to return to the side that we started the rotator cuff strengthening and start doing an overhead press. This also works a number of muscles of the shoulder, not just one. There's also a little bit of core stability because you have to stabilize your whole body while doing this move. Now we switch and do the other side of the shoulder complex overhead press. Next, we transition to the lateral raise. Raise it up as high as you are able to. Next, we transition to the shoulder complex posterior pull. Now we switch sides one last time and do lateral raise. Now we transition to the shoulder complex posterior pull. You can buy resistance bands at dollar stores, online. I've noticed that in some dollar stores they have a lot of exercise equipment for $5 or less. Usually it's on the lighter end of resistance, not heavy weights, but they can work just as well. So be creative. While you are becoming familiar with this sequence, pause the video to practice each activity. Eventually, you will not need this video in order to do this sequence. The approach to these mobility sequences is to demonstrate activities that can be done throughout the day. The more you can find ways to incorporate this sequence into your daily life, the more benefit you will find. Fitness is a daily lifestyle that can be improved with small steps throughout the day.